As France and India mark 25 years of their strategic partnership, what did Prime Minister Modi's visit to Paris yield apart from the big-ticket defence deal? Did the European Parliament's resolution on Manipur mar the march past at all? Or did France even outdo the United States with its red carpet welcome? Hello and welcome to Worldview at the Hindu with me, Suhasini Haidar. As you can see, I'm traveling again, this time to Hampi for the G20 Sherpa meeting in Karnataka, which I'll tell you about in a future edition of Worldview. But for the moment, marching in step, Indian and French troops took part in France's National Day or Bastilleday parade, an event where Prime Minister Modi was invited as the chief guest by French President Emmanuel Macron. Along with the tri-services marching down the Champs-Élysées, Indian Air Force Rafale fighter jets were in the flypast and the INS Chennai docked at France's Brest port. The occasion, of course, was marking 25 years of the France-India strategic partnership signed in 1998. And remember, it was India's first SPA. After meetings the same evening, here's what Mr. Macron and Mr. Modi agreed on. And you can put them broadly into three major silos, all of them on that joint statement on the MEA's website. One was about renewing the 25-year strategic partnership. They had a comprehensive roadmap on Indo-French strategic partnership, which is called Horizon 2047, not 2048, because presumably this would now coincide with 100 years of India's independence. Second was a roadmap on India-France cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Now this includes cooperation in naval exchanges, port calls, joint patrols. France has a unique joint patrol relationship with India and also has a number of overseas territories in the Indian Ocean like Reunion and also in the Pacific Ocean like New Caledonia and French Polynesia. The two sides also agreed to set up an Indo-Pacific trilateral fund to help fund projects like startups and other development projects in the region. The third was space cooperation, which will be strengthened again in three areas primarily. And remember, France's first support to ISRO actually dates back to 1951. So one was the India-France Joint Earth Observation Mission. It's called Trishna. That's a project for the implementing arrangement they talked about, as well as the Space Climate Observatory to take climate change data from space. The second was about manned flights and the Gaganyaan program, which France is supporting. And the third was Ariane Space and NSIL getting ready to launch commercial services. Now, the event, of course, coincided with a proud moment for India as ISRO conducted another attempt to send Chandrayaan-3 to the moon surface. That also happened on July 14th, a happy moment all around. Now, back to India and France. There was nuclear cooperation on the agenda. No progress was actually announced on the pending deal. And remember, it's been years for an MOU of 6 EPRs in Jayatapur, nuclear power plants in Jayatapur. There was no movement on that, but the Prime Minister did announce that they would now look at coordinating on SMRs, small modular reactors, and AMR, advanced modular reactors as well. Then the big ticket items, as I said, were defense, worth more than 10 billion euros, and an attempt to move from just tech transfer or co-production to actually co-development, research together. So one, India cleared off the shelf a purchase for 26 Rafale marine jets for the Navy. This, of course, is in continuation of the 36 the IAF had announced in 2015. India also cleared the purchase of 3 more Scorpion submarines in continuation of the old 2008 program, which is called Kalaveri. And they also agreed to support industrial cooperation to co-develop helicopter engines for the Indian multi-role helicopter program. This is a deal between Hindustan Aeronauticals Limited and Safran, very much like that deal we saw in the US that was on jet engines co-development as well. Now, to take it a step further, the two sides announced that they will work on a roadmap for industrial development cooperation. DRDO will set up an office in Paris, and they will look at research, development, certification, and production. Finally, an agreement between Indian Oil Corporation and French oil company Total for LNG long-term purchases, very important in the post-Ukraine war period. The third silo, if you like, was about people-to-people ties. Now, the first part is trade, and this is really the laggard in the India-France relationship. Despite all the other areas of agreement, trade remains pegged at between $10 to $15 billion. France is not even amongst the 20 largest trading partners for India. It is the 11th largest source of FDI in India. The two sides did promise to address this in some way. India is also planning now to open a new consulate in Marseille in south of France to give visas and consular access. France is offering scholarships and resources, including for non-French speaking Indian students. They want to triple the number from 10,000 at the moment to about 30,000 in 2030. India wants French universities to set up office in India like they have with Australia and other countries. France also announced it would issue 5-year visas for Indians who had earned a postgraduate degree from France. And this will be fun. They've decided to hold joint sporting events in India ahead of the Paris Olympics Games in 2024. Now, clearly the optics and the outcomes may have rivaled the US trip by Prime Minister Modi last month, even outdone them. And of course, the France-US rivalry has played out in the background of much of India's relationship with France. If we want to look at what binds the two countries together, let's go back in history. A few years after independence from the UK, France actually gave up its colonies to India, transferring Pondicherry, Karaikal, Mahe, and Yemen at that time. In later years, Prime Minister Nehru actually made several visits to France. He spoke to Charles de Gaulle, most notably trying to get France to give up its nuclear weapons program. Later, of course, the roles reversed. Then the two sides had a very strict policy of non-interference in each other's internal affairs. When the US stopped uranium supplies to India after the 1974 nuclear test, for example, it was France that stepped in with nuclear fuel for Tarapur. French President Jacques Chirac even came to India as the guest of honor on Republic Day during the emergency in 1976. Remember when the emergency was in place by Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister then. Another awkward visit was in 1998. France and India announced their strategic partnership. Jacques Chirac actually returned as Republic Day chief guest in 1998 along with Prime Minister I.K. Gujral, and the two of them then announced the strategic partnership. 5 months later, under Prime Minister Vajpayee, India announced its nuclear tests, while US and other countries announced sanctions against India. France didn't actually join them, didn't scrap the agreement either. The strategic partnership really grew from strength to strength after that. And when India won a nuclear waiver from the Nuclear Suppliers Group in 2008, it was France, not US, that India signed its first civil nuclear deal with, and then President Sarkozy was the chief guest in January in India that year. Prime Minister Modi has dealt with both President Hollande, who was the chief guest in 2016 during the Republic Day parade, and of course before that they signed that deal for the 36 Rafale fighter. A year later, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh became the first Indian Prime Minister to be invited to the Bastille Day parade, the same as Prime Minister Modi. In fact, in the same year, in 2009, he also went on a state visit to the United States. So some similarities there, of course. And Prime Minister Modi has also dealt with the French President Macron. He came to Delhi in 2018 for a landmark number of agreements, really looking at climate change, green transitions, also the Indo-Pacific. And the two leaders then signed and launched what was called the International Solar Alliance together, which now has 120 signatory countries signed on. Through it all, as I said, what's important is France has really not commented on events inside India and vice versa. Whether you think that's a good thing or not, it's been good for relations between the two. As I said, France did not sanction India over its nuclear tests in 1974 or later in 1998. France did not criticize India during the emergency. More recently, France has not voiced human rights concerns like other Western countries have. In fact, Just as Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Paris, the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which is also in France, actually passed a resolution criticizing the violence in Manipur, what it called Hindu majoritarianism, internet bans, actions against human rights defenders, but none of that was voiced during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Paris. The MEA actually accused the European Parliament of a, quote, colonial mindset, asserting this was an internal matter. You can see those two different statements online. Now, after the Russian war in Ukraine, France has taken a very strong stand and has urged India to change its stance privately, but publicly it has not spoken about it. It didn't even publicly voice its upset when India didn't vote for the French sponsored resolution on Russia asking for humanitarian access to the Ukraine. Unlike the US, France is not trying to target China with its ties with India. The tensions don't come out overtly, whether it's on the LAC or any other. And India did not speak about President Macron's visit to Beijing earlier this year, when he upset all Western countries by saying Europe cannot be a vassal state to the US on its China policy. Both of them understand the Chinese challenge strategically, but they also understand there's a complexity to the relationship given the huge economic ties they have. India has also not mentioned the riots in France, most recently over the killing of a 17-year-old boy who belonged to the Algerian immigrant community, and you saw those visuals playing out on the screens, but there was no statement from India. So what's the worldview take on all of this? The fact is that it isn't just a belief in liberty, equality, fraternity of all humans. That is a common code in India and in France, and of course in many countries. But France and India actually have built a strong tradition of strategic autonomy. Remember, this was something former French President Charles de Gaulle encoded into the French foreign policy, and Prime Minister Nehru enshrined using the term non-alignment. So both respective countries look at this very strongly, strategic autonomy. It has also allowed the France-India relationship to avoid some of the pitfalls of other ties with other countries and develop a consistency between the two that has really lasted decades. So there's no roller coaster ride in the France-India relationship. It has consistently worked on these principles. I'm going to get you some reading recommendations, but with the rider that despite this very unique relationship, there's very little written about India-France ties. One great essay is in Engaging the World, Indian Foreign Policy since 1947. It's a book edited by Shumit Ganguly, and there's a chapter in it on India-France relations called India's Foreign Policy Towards France, a Strategic Partnership First by Jean-Luc Racine. Then there's the Oxford Handbook of Indian Foreign Policy that has a little bit, with edited by David Malone, Raja Mohan, and Srinath Raghavan. A book by a former diplomat called Indian Diplomacy by Rajendra Abhyankar. Another diplomat has written on India and the EU, an insider's view. This is Bhashwati Mukherjee. And then there's a great paper called France and India Decoding the Strategic Partnership by Yves-Marie Robpapin in the IPCS, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and that you can find online over there. Now, I'm going to get you some biographies as well. My Life in Politics by Jacques Chirac. He speaks about why he made that exception for India and certainly did not speak about India's internal affairs. Revolution by Emmanuel Macron, who is the French president, and also has written for the Indian edition of his memoirs with a special preface on India and why it's so important to France. Another great book, which if you get a chance, or read the whole book, but there's a chapter on Charles de Gaulle and why I keep talking about the strategic autonomy concept coming from France, also about European unity, is this book by Henry Kissinger. It's called 6 Strategies for World Leadership. It's really, it's termed Leadership, 6 Studies in World Strategy. And it is really worth a read. Another great book, of course, it's 20 years old, so you need to update it on the US-France rivalry that plays out every once and now. It's called 2 Strategies for Europe, de Gaulle, the United States, and the Atlantic Alliance. We certainly hope you enjoy reading all of these, and join us again on Worldview. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do like the video as well as subscribe to The Hindu's YouTube channel, and also on www.thehindu.com. From the team here, thanks for watching.